all for being here this morning. I know this is not our usual order of business, but I'm delighted to have you, and delighted to learn together some things today. So did everybody get a bucket handout? Okay. Got it. So we'll get to that in a minute. It'll make sense in a little while, I promise. But first, I want to kind of set the tone for the day with a short devotion. This is from Colossians 2, verses 6 and 7. This is Paul writing to the church. It says, "Therefore, just as you have received Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live your lives in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving." Let us pray. Loving God, we give you thanks and praise for this beautiful day, for this opportunity to gather together, to learn and grow, and for this opportunity to help guide your beloved church. We gather as leaders, beloved and called. And we pray that your Spirit would be alive and at work among us and within us and through us as we do what we have to do today. It's in Christ's name that we pray. Amen. So that verse is kind of our theme for the day. The idea that we are continually growing, no matter our age, no matter how long we've been in the church, no matter how many versions of this content we may have heard before, we are continually growing up into Christ Jesus. So, I want to kind of set the table. I also want to note that if y'all need to get coffee or water or go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do, you don't need my permission. This is not a second grade classroom. Do what you've got to do. So, I want to start off by kind of figuring out where we are. Who can tell me what the definition of insanity is?
Personification of it.
The definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. Right? How many of us have heard that before? Okay. So I say that because Parkwood has been in survival mode for a very long time, years. From conflicts with pastors to theological disagreements to conflicts about how the church should be run, and now with a new pastor, a global pandemic, it has been a long time since Parkwood could truly say that we were flourishing and healthy and thriving. Right? Am I wrong? Okay. So when an organization is in survival mode like this, especially for a long time, it learns to behave differently than if it were flourishing and thriving. Those same things that helped you survive this long, to get through, to pull together, they're not necessarily bad. Those habits, those decision-making processes, the making it up as we go, the building the plane as we're flying it. I can talk, I promise. Those are the things that helped you all survive, and that's not a bad thing. But think of it this way. How many of us have seen a zombie apocalypse movie? One? Okay. Well, Linda will get what I'm about to say. We all know the general concept of zombie apocalypse, right? Everybody gets infected, somebody's being chased by zombies. When you're in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, you do not care when the last time it was that the car you're driving had its oil changed, right?
Right.
Your focus is on surviving. Unless the car breaks down completely, it does not matter. But when you get to safety, the immediate threat is over. You have to change your mindset and start thinking again about long-term planning. You have to figure out, for example, how to get fruit and veggies into your diet and not just live on canned beans so you don't get scurvy, right? You have to change the oil in the cars if you're going to continue to use them. You have to work with your new neighbors to figure out the fence lines and the boundaries and who's mowing and all of that fun stuff. So that's kind of the track that we're on today, is thinking about changing that mindset out of survival mode and into what will it take for us to flourish and thrive as a congregation. That doesn't mean that, COVID is over. It doesn't mean we're all going to magically get along. But we're going to think about some of the tools and some of the concepts that can help us flip that mindset. Make sense? Excellent. That also means that we are not going straight back to the way things were before COVID. Everything from our communications to our ministry priorities to our policies and our structures are in some way up for debate and up for change. This means, especially for those of you who are committee chairs, things may change rapidly. The session may make a decision and all of a sudden we're pivoting over here. That doesn't mean that the way we did it before was wrong. It just means that we are taking a new track. That said, we want those changes to be rooted and grounded in something other than what we feel like doing that day. The session has been working on strategic planning for the last 6-8 months, something like that. And so later we're going to go over a draft of a new mission statement and work through that together. And that will be kind of the roots of everything that we do. So we're going to try some new things in the near future, but the goal is also not to take the shotgun approach, where we're doing everything all the time, right? We, instead, are going to think critically and purposefully about what we do and why we do it. Not just practically, but also theologically. That may not be your normal mode of thinking for most people. It's my normal mode of thinking because I'm weird and that's what I do for a living. But that's part of why I'm here, is to help us think theologically about what we do and why we do it. All right. Also, some housekeeping things that I promised I would communicate. Scheduling. If you plan a meeting, a gathering, an event, a project, even if it's on Zoom, please tell Kathy in the office so that we are keeping track of who's meeting when, and also the space, but also so that we can put it on the calendar and in the bulletin so that folks actually remember when your meetings are, okay? That also means that if you're planning on doing something here, it helps to check the church calendar before you plan something to make sure that there's not something already going on. The calendar is on our website, parkwoodchurch.com, but if you don't want to deal with that, you can call the office and say, hey, I want to do something on this day and this time. Is the church open? Kathy Vandervelde is a wizard and will be more than happy to help you with that. Also, because of all of this strategic planning and kind of rethinking, resettling, rerouting ourselves, anything new that you would like to propose, it is to your benefit to take it to session early and often. So if you think, oh, I have an idea for something that I would like to do for a new small group that does this particular thing in the church, it is to your benefit to check in with the session and say, hey, I would love to work on this thing. I don't have a proposal for you yet, but is this something I can move forward with? Or does this conflict with something that is already going on or something that you're already working on? So that, again, we don't wind up in 682 different directions because we all saw something shiny and ran after it.
Sarah,
Yes.
do you want that, does the contact, via email, via a letter to the session? How
So
should that approach be?
if it's coming from a committee specifically, just put it in your committee report and say, you know, item for session consideration, initial thought, or something like that. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a full-fledged proposal, but it's good if we're thinking together about things so that, you know, for example, you don't get all the way through this proposal and have all of these plans in place and then get to session and they say, oh, actually, we're working on this thing over here, and that's not gonna work. So communication, and like the session's not gonna vote on it that first time, but we'll be able to kind of take the temperature and say, yeah, give us a proposal. Does that make sense? Ish? Kind of? Okay. All right, so next I'm gonna have you take out your anxiety bucket handout. So for the next hour or so, we're gonna talk about emotionally healthy leadership. So the first kind of big concept that I'm gonna introduce today, which you may have heard before, is that the church is a system. It is a living kind of ecosystem. So in the same way that in a healthy ecosystem, everything works together. Nothing goes to waste. You have multiple processes going on at once, right? You have the water cycle where it rains, it evaporates, it condenses, etc. You have photosynthesis going on at the same time, where plants take in CO2 and convert it to energy and release oxygen. You have humans or other animals breathing in the oxygen and breathing out CO2. When everything is balanced in an ecosystem, you have the right plants, you have the right animals, you have the right numbers of prey and predators, the right conditions to keep all of those things in balance. That is what makes an ecosystem healthy, right? So how many of you remember when they reintroduced wolves to Yellowstone National Park? Yeah. So reintroducing wolves after they had been extinct there for quite a while had this enormous cascading effect on the ecosystem, right? So all of a sudden the wolves were keeping the deer and the elk populations down, which means that the land they had overgrazed for a long time suddenly grew new plants. It grew better. And that, because of the way that those root systems worked, changed the course of a river going through Yellowstone National Park. Because all of a sudden there was less soil erosion because there were plants that the deer and the elk weren't eating. And it goes on and on and on. So just like an ecosystem, human relationships behave in similar ways. The second kind of big concept is the idea of, the big $10 word is homeostasis. But it is the idea of normal that we have. Humans are wired to want normal. The key is that we have to have a healthy normal in order to want healthy things. So homeostasis is the baseline in any human system. Humans want to keep things at that baseline, even if that baseline is not healthy or helpful. That is how you get super dysfunctional families, for example, who have no desire in changing, because humans are wired to want normal, whatever normal means for us. In order to change that normal, we have to put in extra and additional effort. So remember when I said that we had been in survival mode for a long time? That is now our new normal. That is Parkwood's normal, is survival mode. And so for us to change that, it takes purposeful, extra action on our behalf. We are Parkwoods leaders, with the folks who aren't with us today. But we are the ones who can make changes for good in this system. So that means that the way you show up as an individual in this system matters. It makes a difference how you show up, whether it's running a meeting, whether it's conversations, it makes a difference. So this is where we get to the anxiety bucket handout. So if you want to take that out, I'm going to draw us a bucket. All right. So, how we show up in the system matters, right? But none of us are perfect. I think we can all admit that. Everybody has stuff. We have histories, we have conflicts, we have secrets, and ideally, everyone in the world would have all of the support and the resources that we need in order to not get overwhelmed by that stuff. But we don't live in an ideal world. So, how many of us in the last week have felt overwhelmed by something? Yep, exactly. What overwhelms each of us is going to be different. We're in lots of different life stages with different family, community, jobs, physical issues. But the anxiety bucket, I think, is a really helpful visual to help us think about what help or care we might need. So the basic idea is this. Each of us carries an invisible bucket around with us all the time. In that bucket, we put all of our worries and our fears and our anxieties. Thus, it's called the anxiety bucket. At the bottom of our anxiety bucket is a layer of what I like to call existential anxiety. So this red layer is the anxiety that reminds us, for example, I need to eat today. I need to drink water. I need to show up to work so that I can have food and shelter and water. I need to fix the roof so that it's not leaking on me. This is the anxiety that keeps us alive as humans. So all of us, even if we were perfectly happy, would have a little anxiety. The next layer of anxiety is what I like to call chronic anxiety. So these are your long-term worries.
Sonic?
Chronic. Chronic, yes. So these are usually either about the past or the future. Are the kids going to turn out okay? Why did I say that awkward thing 15 years ago? Long-term family conflicts, trauma, chronic medical issues, etc. These are the things that just kind of lurk in the background of our minds all the time. Everyone carries around a different amount of chronic anxiety. So everyone has this layer, but your chronic anxiety might just be a really thin layer on top of that. Or your chronic anxiety might be all the way up here, which means that the last layer, which is called situational anxiety, has a different amount of room in your anxiety bucket. So situational anxiety is usually kind of those short-term spikes. The furnace breaks. Everybody has norovirus. You have 3 places you're supposed to be all at once on the same day at the same time. The general idea with the anxiety bucket as a whole, that's our situational anxiety layer. The general idea with the anxiety bucket as a whole is that when the bucket overflows, bad things happen. Those negative reactions can affect each of us in different ways. You might snap at the people you love. You might yell at the kids for no apparent reason. You might isolate yourself and say, I can't deal with it. And then cut off the people who might be able to most help you. Sometimes it's your body that reacts. Headaches, exhaustion, eating too much or too little, grinding your teeth, numbing with alcohol or drugs. Some of us take refuge in our minds. You start spinning wildly impossible worst case scenarios and prepping for that zombie apocalypse. You might throw yourself into a project or research or a video game to distract your brain. Or, on the other hand, you might focus so intensely on a particular problem that you lose touch with the rest of the things that are important to you. All of those things are responses to too much anxiety. Some of us can walk around pretty comfortably without spilling our buckets all over each other. But some of us live right at the edge, all day, every day. Here's the thing. We all have different coping mechanisms that we rely on when things get hard. But some of those coping mechanisms are healthier and more helpful than others. And when the anxiety bucket overflows and we start hitting the really unhealthy and unhelpful parts of ourselves, if we don't have good coping mechanisms, then we risk doing damage to ourselves, to our relationships, to the systems that we are a part of, and to the world. So then the question becomes, how do we bail out the anxiety bucket, right? How do we get it below this crisis point where we're spilling all over each other? And how do we maybe, condense some of these layers? The first line of defense is what's called self-care. Now, you might have heard that term, and now you think like, oh, I'm gonna go get my nails done. That may be self-care. But these are things that we can do on our own that refresh us and take some of that situational anxiety down. So, take a break, vent. Set some tighter boundaries around your time and energy. Do something soothing, whether it's snuggling with the dog or taking a walk or doing something creative or organizing a drawer. Those things are all kind of healthy coping mechanisms. But all of those things work best with that top layer, the situational anxiety. They can take the edge off, but a long walk probably won't do much for your worries about your retirement account, for example. So the next level of bailouts or coping mechanisms is what I like to call community care. This is part of where the church comes in. This is what Paul is talking about when he says, when one member suffers, all suffer with them. And when one rejoices, all rejoice together. It can also be the hardest for us to ask for because it involves being vulnerable. It involves saying, I am overwhelmed. It involves asking folks to pray for you and with you, spending some time talking through those big things with someone that you trust, celebrating those small victories and milestones with the people you love. This is a little bit more like sticking a tap into that chronic anxiety layer. You can get at some of that when you have the support of a beloved community. Might still be there. That layer probably isn't going away altogether, but you'll have a release valve before you get to the overflow point. I will also say this every time I do this, that if you really want to chip away at that chronic anxiety, I highly recommend some professional care. I am very much of the opinion that everyone should have a therapist. Even if you think you are absolutely fine, therapy is wonderful. It might be figuring out how to be healthier in the midst of some dysfunctional relationships, dealing with anger, dealing with past conflict, excavating some of those painful memories, maybe even dreaming about about a better future. But a good counselor can help you work through any and all of that. So, how are we feeling? Does this make sense? Do we have questions? No? Okay. So let's take the bucket metaphor and expand it to our whole system. Not only do we bring our anxiety buckets to church with us, but Parkwood has a bucket of its own. Parkwood has an anxiety bucket. Imagine that. So, I want to take a minute, and I have way too many markers up here, and let's kind of think through what might Parkwood's anxiety bucket look like. So, on the level of existential anxiety, what do you think might fit into that category for Parkwood Presbyterian Church?
Maintenance of the church and the personnel.
Yes. So buildings. Dan knows that very well. Is the building in good shape? Do we have enough money to keep the lights on? Do we have a pastor? Anything else? Yeah.
Budget, money situation.
Money. Always. Yeah.
My biggest fear is just numbers of people, membership.
Yeah. Do we have enough people to continue to exist? All right, let's move on. What might be some of the chronic anxiety that we have? Long-term things.
Age-related.
Age-related? Say more about that.
We use the excuse that the congregation is elderly, therefore they can't do this and they can't do that.
Yeah, so an aging membership. What else? I'll say it. People who don't like each other.
Yeah.
What else?
Would the church at large and our culture be part of that? Chronic, like what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So those kind of big questions about church and church decline specifically, is that kind of what you're thinking about? Yeah. How about old conflicts that never fully got resolved? I think, do we have a couple of those?
Yes.
Sometimes those old conflicts give people reinforcement for their identity.
Right, which goes back to that whole idea of that's their normal, right? Being in conflict with other people is their normal. And so if you try to take that away, that doesn't go well. I think theological disagreements also fit into this. So about 10 years ago, when the PCUSA was going through its fight over marriage and ordination for LGBT people, that became kind of a chronic piece of anxiety for a lot of folks. No matter which side of that disagreement you were on, that became a sort of chronic issue. All right, how about the situational anxiety? What might be some examples of situational anxiety? We had one this morning. the coffee pot doesn't work.
I was gonna say the third communion tray.
The third communion tray. Yep. So when things don't go as planned, that creates situational anxiety, right? What else? How about, so for example, making changes to the building, especially big changes. That tends to heighten the anxiety, do we think? Yes.
Personal changes or staffing changes?
Yes. Changes to the building, changes to personnel, to staff, even to leadership and volunteers can create anxiety. Anything else you want to put in the situational?
Masks.
Masks. Yes.
What'd you say?
Masks.
So I want to kind of point out some things, some common themes in here. This is the stuff that we are always going to have to deal with. No matter how big we are, no matter how successful we are always going to have to deal with this stuff. Buildings, members, money. This is the stuff that kind of changes slowly over time. We might wake up one day, for example, and realize that, there's a big theological conflict, or all of a sudden we realize that, the church in the United States, you might have seen that headline, we've reached a point where 50% of the people, more than 50% of people no longer attend religious services on a regular basis. And then this is the stuff that comes up just like that. So the third communion tray, the coffee pot, masks. One day, all of a sudden, we're all, hand sanitizing and wearing masks, and this stuff takes some time to deal with. This stuff, if done well, if dealt with well, we can kind of nip in the bud and bail that out pretty quickly, right? So our job as leaders is to make sure that the church's anxiety bucket does not overflow. What happens when the church's anxiety bucket overflows? Conflict, chaos. Yep, that pretty well nails it. Small conflicts get blown way out of proportion, right? And they get personal. Members leave, they walk away. And sometimes that church anxiety, when it's overflowing, starts to overflow into our personal buckets. And it starts to affect our lives in a negative way. How many of us have been stressed about church stuff? Yeah, exactly. So the question is, how do we manage this systemic anxiety? How do we bail out the church anxiety bucket? One, we do not add additional anxiety to the bucket if we can help it. Nor do we encourage other people to add additional anxiety to the buckets. So our goal, when this stuff comes up especially, is to be what's called a less anxious presence. So Becky, I'm running with your communion tray because that's fresh in my mind. So on Sunday, when I realized that there was no third communion tray, I don't think I panicked. Nobody else seemed to notice. I didn't stalk up to whoever prepared communion and go, "Where's the third tray?" I sent Kathy back to sit down, and I afterwards said, "Becky, come with me," and we served communion. And so that created some additional anxiety in the moment, but we weren't adding additional anxiety to that situation. Does that make sense? And with the coffee pot. Pat, you noticed that the coffee pot wasn't working, and Dan and Lynn and the three of you went and figured it out, and I think now we have coffee.
We do.
Excellent. So our first goal is always to remain calm ourselves. Even if we're not actually calm on the inside, but to present as that less anxious presence and say, okay, we're gonna figure this out. Because little did y'all know, I was sitting up here on Sunday going, 1, 2, oh bleep. And that, all of this stuff that fits in here, the little things that come up, can often be solved by saying, okay, let's deal with that quickly, calmly, and without a whole lot of extra issues. The second thing that we do in order to prevent the anxiety bucket from overflowing, I'm gonna have to take this one down. We good with that? Okay. Is we avoid and we discourage what's called triangulation. Have any of us heard of that before? Hat has. So, for example, triangulation simply means 3. So, person A, I don't know why that happened, it's fine. So, person A has an issue with person B. And the goal is that person A goes directly to person B and says, hey, this is an issue, let's deal with it, right? What we do not want to happen is for person A to go to person C, and person D, and person E, and person Q, and say, person B is the worst, and here's why, and then ask all of these people to go to B. So rather than dealing with it directly, person A has now involved 4 other people who they want to deal with B because they don't want to do it directly. So that's where we get the triangle from. And why is this unhelpful? Because it adds anxiety to the system, completely unnecessarily. And it also is most likely to create permanent conflict between A and B. And I want to say there is a difference between venting or seeking guidance. So for example, person A is mad at person B, and they instead come to me and say, hey, this thing that person B did really upset me, but I don't know how to say that to them. And I say, okay, let's talk through it. What upset you about it? Etc., etc. And then person A goes to person B and has that conversation. That is not triangulation, right? Because they're still having that conversation directly. That is seeking guidance. Does that make sense? Okay. So those are some of the ways that we avoid adding additional anxiety to the bucket. Yes.
If I could interject about the triangulation, because and my experience of us often happens with a pastor being B. That people might have a question or an issue or upset with the pastor, and rather than going to the pastor, they triangulate. They tell everybody else what they're upset about, and then they create, so I just wanted to speak to that often, I think, in a church.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I think what you're saying is leaders that we direct to the pastor.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So the way that we cut off triangulation is for all of these people. I should have really just drawn one of them, but I got a little carried away. So let's forget all of these and go with Q. So the way that we cut off triangulation is to send that straight back to person A, to say, oh, have you talked to person B about that? Or have you, sought guidance from whoever? It's as simple as that, to say, yeah, you really need to talk to the person that you're directly upset with. And sometimes, especially for folks who are kind of conflict avoidant, they don't like conflict, that's going to be really hard for them to go straight to person B and say, hey, that thing you said was really hurtful, or, A, B, C, or D. But that is healthy communication, and that's what we want to get to. And sometimes it helps to practice that with very little things. So instead of, you grossly offended me and I'm going to hate you forever for what you said, maybe it's person B forgot to put the decaf coffee out on Sunday, and person A can't have caffeine, and so they felt left out. So rather than going to all of these people and saying, I can't believe they forgot the decaf coffee, we need to fix it. You need to fix this right now.
Those little things.
It is.
I think part of it, yeah, they feel slighted.
Right. And so, but as leaders, our job is to direct them directly back to B and say, I'm sorry you're upset, but you really need to talk to person B about that.
Pastor?
Yeah.
Sometimes you think it's all right for person A to ask pastor to be present when they talk to the person B?
Yes. And that's the other thing, is you may come with like a support person, but you're not asking that person to do that work for you, right?
Just be present.
Right. And ideally, it would be someone who's neutral in this conflict, right? So you're not showing up with an army of supporters. But especially for big things, it's helpful to have that kind of mediator to say, okay, this is what I hear you saying, and this is what I hear you saying, and how do we meet in the middle? Yeah. There's something else I was going to say about this. The other thing that can take the anxiety bucket right over the top is taking things personally that were not meant personally, right? So in the decaf coffee example, it would be extremely easy for someone to say they hate me and therefore they didn't put out the decaf coffee, right? That's probably not true. It may just be we didn't have decaf coffee that Sunday. We only have one working coffee pot, so we couldn't do 2 batches. And so that's, again, why it's important to direct them directly to that person. Because most of the time, it's probably not personal. And yeah.
Sarah?
Yes.
I have to say, I don't know if this is appropriate thing that I always bring to my mind is that there is no conflict unless you choose to
Absolutely. There is no conflict unless you choose to participate. And that kind of goes back to that less anxious presence, right? So when somebody comes at you and says, you hate me and you didn't put the decaf coffee out, you can either react and say, whoa, you're insane, which is not going to help the situation. Or you can calmly explain, oh, I'm so sorry, we didn't have any decaf this morning and I didn't have time to run to the store before worship. I'll put it out next week. And in that way, you kind of cut that conflict off at the root, right? Because it really wasn't personal. And I will say, sometimes there are like interpersonal conflicts that are personal. But that doesn't mean we can't work through them. So, I think, the other way that we can bail out the anxiety bucket or prevent it from overflowing is whenever we make changes, big changes, small changes, we do it deliberately and with good reason. So for example, like, I'm not gonna show up one day and paint my office neon green, right? Just because I felt like it. That would create some conflict. You know, we're not going to shut a program down for no good reason because we feel like it. I don't think any of y'all have done that, but it also helps to over-communicate. So whether it's the press, announcements from the pulpit, the more times we say it, the more opportunities folks have to process it and not put it in their anxiety bucket in the first place. The other thing we can do is we can be proactive about creating healthy boundaries and creating healthy policies. So, for example, right now everything goes through the session. Anything new, anything that goes out into the world on behalf of Parkwood Presbyterian Church goes through the session. That is a healthy boundary because the session is the group of people who are elected to act on behalf of the whole church. So we don't have 58 people doing 58 different things all willy-nilly. That is a boundary that we've set that says if you're going to do it on behalf of Parkwood Presbyterian Church, it needs to be approved by the session. And that helps us avoid a significant number of conflicts because as long as we communicate about those things, then we can avoid that conflict altogether. All right. Yes.
Will you be talking about trust? You know, this last one you said about changes with good reasons. I feel there, and perhaps all of us at different points, is that we don't trust it. Or we don't trust the people making the changes for good reasons. So will you be speaking to that or?
Yeah, so part of this, and part of the kind of over-communication piece is building that trust. Because I think a lot of us default to wanting to trust the systems. Some of us default to actively distrusting the leadership and the systems. But one of the ways that we build trust is by communicating quickly, clearly, and again, setting those healthy boundaries and healthy policies. Yes.
Pastor Pat showed us a good example of that as we were on the pastor nominating committee. It was very important that she brought it up, and maybe I wasn't thinking about her or others to immediately communicate to the congregation our progress. Because they were like hanging in limbo. We knew.
Right.
We knew what was going on.
Yeah.
But they didn't. And I thought that was very
communication all along that process is super important. And it also involves saying no in compassionate ways, right? So rather than when somebody comes to, say, the session or your committee with an idea and says, I would really love to do this, rather than just saying, no, that's not our priority right now. There are ways to say, for example, like, okay, help me understand how that fits into what we're working on and what our committee does. And if you get to a point where you both realize that, you know, this doesn't fit, or this is better off as a different kind of ministry or a different kind of group, that's going to earn you more trust than just saying, no, that's not our priority right now. And it's in those little conversations with compassion. And I think one of the most important things about building trust is curiosity. So rather than meeting something with a wall, there are two phrases that help me with curiosity. So the first one I just used, help me understand. Help me understand what you're thinking and where this is coming from in you. So, you know, the person with a new ministry idea might be really enthusiastic about a particular project or program because they're personally invested in it somehow. You know, they have a friend or a family member who's affected by this foundation, or they volunteer with this particular program or something like that. And so it may be that that's not something we can do right now, but allowing them to express that, what's most important to them, and why they think that we should be part of it, goes a long way in building that trust. Because they know that even if it's not going to work out in the end, they've been heard, they've been listened to, and it's been fully evaluated, and not just rejected outright. Does that make sense? So help me understand is that first phrase. The second one is, I'm feeling blank. Give me a minute. So I think all of you have been in meetings with me where like my brain glitches and I need a minute to think it out before I can fully respond. So what I do in those situations is, so for example, sorry, I'm feeling really frustrated. Give me a minute to sort my thoughts. And then the group can move on, whatever. But it names what's going on in me, and the reason that I am struggling with something, without putting that on the other person. So rather than reacting out of my frustration, and putting all of my anxiety about that onto the other person, I am instead taking a second to step back and work through my own stuff, and then I can move on with whatever we're doing. So help me understand, give me a minute, can be two of the really helpful phrases for encountering folks with curiosity rather than reactiveness. I do want to take a minute to talk about responding versus reacting. So reacting is the fight or flight mode, right? Where somebody says something and that immediately flips something in your brain and you just want to Hulk smash. We've all had those moments, right? And so when you react, you act on that. Responding is that give me a minute. So rather than Hulk smashing, I'm going to take a step back and calm myself, and do some internal thinking before I respond with a calm, measured, curious response. sometimes we get stuck in this reactive brain. And that's how those petty conflicts get blown completely out of proportion, because we get stuck in this reactive brain. But when we take the time to respond, then we can head that off before we accidentally Hulk smash somebody. Does that kind of answer your question about trust? Okay. All right. I think that is all of the content I have for you. How are we feeling? What are we thinking? Are your brains completely overwhelmed?
I'm thinking it would be wonderful if all of the members could be here and working on this and hearing you and hearing these patterns and things that could happen. It would be
Yeah.
wonderful if everyone
Maybe it could be part of the sermon.
Yeah, so full disclosure, that whole presentation I just did was actually chunks of sermons that I've done before. So I have it in my back pocket. But yes, and I do think it's helpful for the whole congregation to hear this eventually. I think it's most important that the leadership understand it first, so that by the time it gets out to everyone, we're kind of not experts. I don't expect expertise, but we're already practicing that and working through these things, so that when we go to our committee meetings or session meetings or whatever, then by the time it gets to the rest of the congregation, we're all old hands. Yeah.
Sarah, do you think, with it being videotape, that might be a useful training for new elders, new chair people, that, that they could actually, for this particular part, maybe have that as an instructional piece?
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the reason that we're videotaping it. And so usually, what I do with the leadership is, that's why I called this the first annual leadership summit. Because usually, again, we would do this in January with everyone, including the new elders. And it'll be a full day. We'll go through this stuff, because every time I go through it, I realize something new. And do some of the other leadership training that we did via video. The elders, I recorded a bunch of videos and made them watch them in December and January. So, yes. Yeah. And if you're really interested in this and want to read more, if you're a reader, I do have a couple of books that you are most welcome to borrow. One is called How Your Church Family Works, and the other one I think is Creating Healthy Congregations. You are most welcome to borrow those anytime. So,
What was the second one called, Pastor?
Creating Healthy Congregations. Got all of my pages out of order. That's super helpful, Sarah. All right, so next, what we're gonna do is we are going to practice all of these things that we just learned. I have some case studies for us. So there are 2, 4, 6, 8. So we're gonna do 2 groups of 3 and 1 pair. And I'm going to give you each a case study to work through using what we've just learned.